Hello everybody, Cam S here. Today we are going to be doing kind of a setup video of what my go-to methods are for mostly bass, but some of these setups are pretty good at catching just about anything. So I'm going to order it in kind of a top 5 countdown, but some of these setups are better in different circumstances. So I don't want you to think that number 1 is always the best option to go with. Sometimes number 4 or 5 is way better to use in a different circumstance. So it's not really a set scale, but that's kind of the order we're going in because number 1 is obviously my favorite, but 2, 3, 4, and 5 also catch a lot of fish. So it's also a good time to do it right now too, because not only is spring coming around, everybody's going to be hitting the water, but right now in Michigan it's too warm to hit the ice. There's no more ice left. Well, there's a little bit, but not very much. Not enough to be safe out there. And it's still too cold to really get a good bass bite. It's too early in the season to go out there for bass. I did try going yesterday for steelhead, but I really don't have much of a background in steelhead fishing, so I didn't really know where to start. I tried it for a while and didn't have a single bite. So without further ado, let's get into number 5. So like I said earlier, this is mainly towards bass fishing, but number 5 works for a lot of different species. My number 5 is hard baits, like hard rapalas, and hard swim baits, like jointed swim baits. So these are good in a lot of different circumstances. It doesn't matter what kind of water you're in, and there's a lot of different sizes as well. So if they're being finicky with their bite, you can always go down to a smaller size like this. And my go-to for these are either the jointed swim baits like this, and I usually like to use these types of things in more of a stream or river condition because you can get them up in the current and they act really good in that current. And other times I really like this golden color. They got rattles in them, so I really like that because that used to be my go-to for fishing. I would always use just this anytime I'd go out. I would use typically either the one I just showed you or one just a little bit smaller and with the rattles in it. And the nice thing about these is depending on what size you use, you can catch a lot of different fish with the same lure. And you can get smallmouth, largemouth, even bluegill I've had hit these. You can also target walleye with it, pike, basically anything that you can think of in Michigan in the right circumstances will hit these, which is not always the case for some of the later lures that I'm going to be talking about. So typically when I'm fishing these, it depends on the water that I'm in. If I know there's pike in the area, I typically have a steel leader on because I'll get very frustrated if I end up losing my lure. But most of the time, I only fish with 10-pound mono. So that's all I really use is 10-pound mono, and it gets the job done with these, especially in clear water scenarios. Just that 10-pound mono with no leader on it works very well. And like I said, when I was younger, that was my go-to for fishing because I would always get bigger bluegill, bass, and anything that has a little bit of aggression in it, especially during the times around beds. Typically it will strike one of these. So now we can move on to what I have put at number 4. For my number 4, I really go towards the more flashier presentation baits. And these are pretty good for switching up the color in an area if you are not gonna bite on one. Because typically an aggressive fish will hit something that is very flashy and makes a lot of vibration in the water. So if there's like perch or something like that in the water, it's a very green water area, I go with a more of a perch, green and orange and yellow style. And then if it's more of a clear water with kind of shad or lighter colored bait fish, I throw this. And it really depends on the color of the water and what the bait fish look like in the area. So if you're got some more greener fish in the area, that's what I go with. Or whitefish, go with that. I have caught pike, largemouth, and even smallmouth on a spinnerbait. So they're really good for a lot of different circumstances. And another flashy presentation lure that I go with is the rooster tail, like this. This is good for streams and rivers because you can catch pike, smallmouth, largemouth, and I've even caught some like suckers or like chubs on it. And it's good for fast moving water where this will flicker around quite a bit. So usually in waters that are more still and kind of like ponds, lakes, or a river where there's not much current, I will throw the spinnerbait, and that will trigger bigger strikes because it's more of a larger presentation. But in this one you can even catch trout on. So they're both kind of the same like idea, concept, where they've got a blade on there that flashes around, and just depending on what circumstances you're in, it will depend on what one works better. But typically when I'm running the rooster tail, I will just have it on a snap swivel or tied directly to my line. I usually like to have the snap swivel on there because it spins so much and it will really tie up your line and knot it up eventually. I don't typically use a leader while using this. And like I said, you can catch many different things on this. I've caught smallmouth, largemouth, I've caught rock bass, I think I've even caught bluegill on this before. So it's a nice thing to have for the more finicky bites. Smaller, just get it right in front of their faces and they will hopefully have an aggressive strike on it. And this one I almost always have a leader on, a metal leader, because if it is an area with a pike love these and will hit them quite a bit. So if I know there's no pike in the area, I'm just going to put a snap swivel on there and go fishing. But if I'm not sure if there's pike in the area, or I know there's pike in the area, there's a good chance that a pike is going to hit this. So like I said earlier, I only use 10-pound monofilament, so a leader is a good option with this one. And now we can go on to number 3 of my go-tos. And the next technique I use is more of a crawfish style presentation. So you can pair these up with jigs like this. I usually like the red ones, the red and black with the watermelon colored trailers behind it. And another thing I really grew to love this previous year fishing was the rattling Ned. And all you do with this is put a jig head in it and it rattles. So all of these you can use kind of in the same circumstances. This is good for flipping on docks or any other kind of brush. It's weedless and it is good for that. This works good in a lot of different scenarios, whether it's rocky or you're, like I said, flipping up onto the bank. This one is better in rockier situations. So you put a jig head on here, throw it out, and just kind of twitch it a little bit. Pull it off the bottom and just let it sit. Pull it off the bottom, just let it sit. And it kind of floats on the bottom like this, and it's really good for smallmouth. I have caught largemouth on this before, and I've also caught a pike on this before, but typically this is very good with smallmouth. This, on the other hand, they're bigger presentations, and mostly the only thing I catch on these are largemouth. So I do kind of the same thing with these that I do with the rattling Ned. Toss it up by some structure, pull it off, let it sit, pull it off, let it sit, because they'll sit on the bottom like this, like a crawfish, and just kind of bounce it and twitch it. And if one thing doesn't work, I'll either try to switch to a longer pull where it comes way off the bottom and just kind of floats down, or if that doesn't work, I'll do some more aggressive twitches. So I'll like just kind of twitch it towards me or pull really hard towards me. Just try to switch things up to try to entice a bite. But like I said, I really grew to love these rattling Neds this past year, going down rivers and stuff like that where it's more rocky. You can just toss it into a deep hole and kind of just twitch it around a little bit, and it was very productive for smallmouth. So with that said, we can now move on to the next one. And the next one, as silly as it sounds, is one of my favorite ways to go fishing because it is very productive most of the time. It's very good for overfished areas, and it's just good for catching quite a bit of fish in most circumstances. So typically use a night crawler, and sometimes I will just put a sinker on and a hook and toss it out there and just let it sit. That's good for a lot of different circumstances. If it's not too weedy, and if it is too weedy or snaggy, I throw a bobber on and just let it drift down the water. If it's a current area, or if it's a pond or a lake, I just let it sit out there. So I have had a lot of luck in the last couple of years using live night crawlers. I've caught sucker, carp, perch, bluegill, bass, largemouth bass, and smallmouth bass, and I have caught so many fish when I have gone to some place and tried all the techniques that I just told you and not caught maybe 1 or 2 fish. I'll go back the very next day and use live bait and get a ton of fish. So if everything else fails, it could never hurt to put a worm or a night crawler on, because I have caught some of my biggest fish on live bait. And although you might feel silly out there using a bobber, they can be very productive for even bass. I've caught some of my biggest smallmouths on a night crawler and bobber. So that is one of my main go-tos, and I honestly would probably use it more if it wasn't such a hassle. Sometimes it's just nice to go out and throw on an artificial bait and just throw so you're not getting covered in stuff. Now we can go on to my very go-to, which I'm sure most of you that if you're subscribed know what it is. So I'm sure if you've watched my channel before, you know that my go-to is the Wacky Rig. And before, probably 4 or 5 years ago, my uncle was trying to talk me into using it, and I was not committed to using it. That I kept trying my old techniques and not catching anything on one of the lakes that he suggested, and I could not catch a single fish. And finally one day I gave in to using this, and I did not want to use it because it looked just like a log in the water. I was like, why would any fish want to bite just a random rubber worm that's just sitting there? Sure enough, I caught some very big bass and caught quite a bit of them. So ever since that point, this is really my go-to when I'm fishing ponds or lakes. That you go, it's best if you go out and you're in a boat or a kayak or in the water, so you can throw it up onto shore, or near shore I should say, next to the structure, and pull it off and pull it off and pull it off slowly. Let it sit there, then pull it off the bottom and let it sit again, so that it's kind of slowly and gradually going off that drop off away from the structure, trying to get more exposure to fish as you're coming out. So typically what I do is I'll cast it by structure and let it sit. And once I wait for a little bit, I'll most of the times give it a couple quick twitches, pull it off the bottom, and then just let it sit. And if that does not work, you can do the same exact thing and have a long, drawn-out pull. That way it gets way off the bottom and has more time to come back down. And typically, this works very well for largemouth. It's a very low-profile thing that you can even cast up by docks and stuff like that. So the weightlessness of it has a lot of hang time, so it's nice for finessing and doing other things like that. But unfortunately, it has become my go-to, so I do not probably try out as many baits as I should. I get very concentrated on using this since it has been so productive for me. But all I use is an octopus hook, put that ring around it, and typically I use green with either red or golden glitter in it, because that's what's worked best for me. But there are thousands or hundreds of different colors out there, different kinds, so figure out what works best for your area. And I would say that this could be a very productive thing for your area, because like I said, it has been very good for me for largemouth fishing. I've also had some relatives catch a pike on the Wacky Rig as well, so it can be a very productive tool that you can use when all else fails. So like I said, these are my top 5. They are not the only thing I use. I probably should expand a little bit this upcoming year to try out some more stuff to see if anything else works, because I do get very close-minded when I'm fishing and just stick with one or two things. So probably a better thing for me to open up. I hope this helped you out, and hopefully it will help you improve your fishing game this spring and summer. And it should not be very long before we're able to get out and turkey hunt, and hopefully we can actually get out and catch some fish very soon. I'm getting very antsy. I want to go fishing, but it's not totally the best circumstances right now. It's only 30 today, so not going to be very warm to be out fishing. So hopefully it warms up next week and we can get out and do something. And I hope this video helped you out. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.
Oh my